Ladies and gentlemen, messieurs, dames, si vous voulez, prenez vos places. Take your seats. The panel is about to commence. I'm Jason Solomons. Welcome back. If you've just joined us here in the Ciné Lumière at the French Institute, welcome. Where have you been? You've missed so many fantastic ideas on this night of ideas. Just to illustrate who I am, as a man with a sandwich here, he's getting hungry. I'm Jason Solomons. I'm a host of the film podcast, Seen Any Good Films Lately, and the film editor of the New European newspaper, so you can read me in there. And I'm often here talking about films, but tonight I'm also talking about ideas that come from everywhere. We've got artists, poets, architects, filmmakers, politicians, writers, and we've just had a fantastic panel with Elif Shafak and Agnès Poirier, and we've got another fantastic panel coming up for you now. Again, looking at another side of the world coming together, rebuilding together. That's our theme, and we're going to look now at the climate from that, as you can tell, from A Planet of Everyone's Known. We've got a fantastic, fantastic panel. Chairing the panel, would you please welcome Anne-Sylvaine Chassany from the Financial Times. Merci, Anne, if you go there, as the chair. And joining her on stage here in the Ciné Lumière is the extremely fantastic author, Véronique Tadjo. Veronique's novel is on sale downstairs at the South Kensington bookstore, so please buy it. She'll tell you all about it, Véronique, si vous voulez. They are joined by two guests remotely. There they are, brilliant. We've got Elena Fiddian-Qasmiyeh, who's over there. I don't know where you are, Elena, in the world.
I'm in the distant realms of Oxford.
Right, in Oxford. I'm afraid we're going to beat you with something more exotic. We've got Leoluca Orlando, who is the mayor of Palermo in Sicily. Buonasera.
Hi. Buonasera. Thanks for this invitation.
Great to have you. I will, just before we start, if you're okay in Palermo and in Oxford and here, we have a poet with us this evening, ladies and gentlemen, who's distilling ideas into very short, beautiful poems. He's been introducing every panel with a poem themed along the title of the panel. So would you please welcome back to the stage Anthony ANAXAGOROU. Yeah. Planet of Everyone's Own.
Planet of Everyone's Own, right. Hello, everyone. How are you? Very good to see you. I'm going to read a poem that has been inspired by the discussion that is about to take place. A planet of everyone's own. I'm at the border, which means I'm home. Again, around me, birds migrate towards the same sky as yesterday. They have no language for what we use to contain a body. The wind sweeps up the dust and the dust is off, freer than a whistle. My island has a broken hip bone. My island voted for itself in the chaos of itself. I don't believe everything I read, but I read and believe in everything. Nonetheless, once I watched a man dig an alphabet from out his arms. Scarred with water and rain, I sung him a slow poem, but his arms were thick and wordless, tracks running through him like a bad dancer. I thought, what would a bird say now? And what about the dust, again, smarter than us? I don't know much about war, but I know it lives in the body the way grief occupies a throat. In the distance, I can see the bulldozers. They have my country's name on. I'm at the protest with 6 others. Look at me shout, stop. Look at me wave, no more. The protest has run out of steam, meaning we are back where we started. At home, we put our placards to rest, take our shoes off, tuck our kids to sleep before turning off the news.
Anthony ANAXAGOROU, ladies and gentlemen, our resident poet tonight. How lucky we are to have him and all his ideas. How lucky we are to have this panel, A Planet of Everyone's Own. I hand je vous passe la parole.
Thank you, Jason. Chassany. Thank you, and thank you for the wonderful poem. Very powerful, very moving. Yes, we are indeed going to talk about this planet, and more specifically, borders and migrations, and it's particularly topical after this pandemic. We've always, been quite constrained in our mobility, in our freedom of movement, but we've also been confronted with unprecedented migration spurred by war and, some region climate change. So it's a fascinating subject to tackle with my panelists. I'm the world news editor at the Financial Times, which means I'm commission stories and I edit stories on the news, foreign news, so everything but the UK, although the UK is part of the world as well. And I'm going to introduce my panel. Véronique Tadjo, you are a poet as well. You're a novelist, an artist, an academic. You're born in Paris and raised in Côte d'Ivoire. You graduated from Sorbonne. You studied in Washington, D.C. at the Howard University. And you've written many novels, including the last one, I think, In the Company of Men, which is, you'll see, about a pandemic and a virus. And but obviously you've written that novel before this particular COVID pandemic, so that'll be really interesting. We also have Elena Fiddian-Qasmiyeh. You're professor of migration and refugee studies at University College London. You are the co-director of the UCL's Migration Research Unit. And you've co-edited, I think, a study, a book, a big document on refuge in a moving world, which is kind of a research network paper or document across UCL. And finally, we have Leoluca Orlando, and you are indeed the mayor of Palermo from Sicily, and you're also a member of the European Parliament, and you're also a lawyer and a professor of regional public law at the University of Palermo. So everybody will have, a few minutes on my panel to kind of, outline their thoughts and ideas about, this idea of borders. How come, at a time we have more and more global emergencies, at a time our planet really feels one, we are also erecting borders at an unprecedented pace in the past few years. Maybe, Véronique, would you like to start with us?
Hello? Oui? Yes? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your introduction. And thank you to the Institute for having me. I heard some very, very, very interesting ideas from the former panels, and I'm happy to continue the conversation. Well, I don't know if I'm qualified to talk about crossing borders, because in fact I'm a product of people who have crossed borders. My father was unfortunately from Côte d'Ivoire, and he went to Paris to do his studies, and he met my mother, who was French and from the Burgundy area. And yeah, my brother and I were born. So I've always remembered that crossing borders is something that can bring a lot of richness, but sometimes division as well, because it's not always easy. But what is interesting in my parents' case is that my father went to France where he did his studies, and then my mother came to Côte d'Ivoire and spent most of her life in Côte d'Ivoire, and also died in Côte d'Ivoire. I think that when we're looking at crossing borders, sometimes we don't realize that things are so different from one place to another. in Europe, I think we look at the migration crisis, and it looks like it's the end of the world. And there's a big theories like the grand remplacement, or that every the Western society is going to be overcome and flooded by migrants of all sorts who are only bringing disaster with them. But we have to remember that most migrants, in fact, migrate to the nearest place, and that the countries that are receiving most migrants are the ones that are surrounded by places where there are wars, conflicts, and also sometimes more and more environmental disasters due to climate change. So we need to look at what is happening. Look at what is happening in Syria. Look at what is happening in Afghanistan. Look at what is happening in Turkey. All of these places have been affected by conflicts in which Western countries have had something to do. And so let's look at things with less passion, if you want. And so if we're trying to, in the face of this pandemic and this climate crisis, I think that unless we decide that we're working together, we probably are not going to survive this. So we need cooperation at a big scale, and we need to try and stay calm and see how we can understand the issues and how we can arrive at some sort of a fairness. When there is a big crisis, you're going to have movements of people. But you have to look at responsibilities, accountabilities. We've talked about, I heard about all the inequalities that have been highlighted by the pandemic. And we also, I think, must understand that the pandemic is not a one-off, and that it doesn't come out of nowhere, but it comes out of this global environmental crisis. So all I can say to end is that unless we can find some new forms of solidarity, some new forms of working together, that means some countries have some weaknesses but can offer some strength, and then we can see where we can collaborate to get over this major crisis.
Thank you. Thank you, Véronique. Elena, Fiddian-Qasmiyeh, do you want to jump in and tell us what this theme inspires you?
Thank you so much, Veronique. I'm going to build on some of the points that you've raised so importantly, which is really to start by gently pushing back, or perhaps not so gently, but in fact with passion, pushing back on the presentist bias and the exceptionalist rhetoric that is so typically used around questions of migration and displacement, and that indeed the very notion of crisis suggests that this is characterized by disruption and rupture, and yet what we can really see is different processes of continuation. And so echoing Veronique, a key recurrent myth relating to migration is that we live in an age of unprecedented migration. And yet if we look historically, what we see is that actually compared to the global population, the proportion of international migrants actually engaging in border crossings remains remarkably stable. So between 2.5 and 3% of the world's population last century, and a continuation of that into this century as well. So in fact, if an urgent question exists to ask why more people don't migrate internationally, and what are the effects of being unable to migrate, being unable to cross those borders. And as again, Veronique has very clearly illustrated, most migrants remain within the so-called global south, with around 90% of all refugees remaining within their regions of origin. And for most of these people, their lives are as characterized by forced migration as they are by forced immobility. And the processes that force people to remain immobile against their wishes, against their well-being, against their rights, are borders and are different systems which are part of racist and racialized structures which aim to keep particular people in particular places. And here we can tie this to the pandemic, which is that what has been particularly shocking for many people in the pandemic has been the sudden inability for certain people to be able to travel easily for work, for pleasure, to visit family. And this has been very shocking, and it's been covered extensively in the media and political rhetoric, etc. In the case of Europe and North America, for example, the immobility and the impacts of border restrictions and border closures and the intense pain and passion that people have expressed because of being unable to travel to attend weddings or funerals. These are precisely the forms of immobility and the impacts of border restrictions and border closures, which have characterized the lives of so many migrants and refugees throughout history. So this is a continuation of long-standing processes of inequality. And rebuilding in this context requires challenging diverse structural inequalities, which have long, long histories and which require solidarity moving forward. But I'm going to conclude by kind of moving beyond the pessimistic figures, for example, to say that while people are in situations of immobility, people do not simply wait, but they strive to build and rebuild meaningful lives in conditions of extreme precarity. They often receive essential forms of support from members of host communities, as I'm sure that we'll be hearing from the case of Palermo and other places around the Mediterranean, which have expressed great hospitality at different historical junctures towards migrants and refugees. But also refugees providing support to other refugees, which is something that I've been exploring in my refugee hosts research project. And here I'm just going to read a short extract from a poem written by the writer in residence to my research project, Yusuf Mustafa-Qasmiyeh. And I'll read the poem, Writing the Camp, which is included in his collection of the same title. And he writes, "Refugees ask other refugees, who are we to come to you, and who are you to come to us? Nobody answers. Palestinians, Syrians, Iraqis, Kurds share the camp, the same different camp, the camp of a camp. They have all come to re-originate the beginning with their own hands and feet." So I think this is a very powerful series of lines, which really exemplify the ways that people are meeting one another in contexts of migration, whether it's in camps or cities, and they are not simply waiting, they are rebuilding, they are re-originating the beginning with their own hands and feet. And this is what people have been doing throughout history. And this is the long history of systems of mutual aid and solidarity, which we have seen again coming through very clearly in the pandemic, but which have long histories in relation to migration and displacement, and which can be built upon as we continue to strive to challenge structural inequalities and ensure that people's rights are upheld rather than undermined as we move forward from this very complex series of overlapping crises. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. What about you, Leoluca, Orlando? What do you want to say?
I just wish to say many, many thanks. But before thanking, I wish just to say only two little points. The first, I just registered a video message to say best wishes to Chinese Palermitans, because as you probably know, the 1st February is the new Hia Day, is the Chinese Tiger here. The second point, Mediterranean for us is not a sea dividing the people. For us, Mediterranean is a continent of water, is a liquid continent, just letting the people be able to live together in a common home. But I say that I have to say many thanks. So first of all, I wish to say thanks to the sufferances of the migrants, and to say thanks to the people who died, who were infected and killed by COVID. And I think that in this moment it's possible to ask, what about cities between human mobility and human rights? What about the role of the cities in a really global condition where we need just to promote the human mobility and we have to promote the human rights? And then following just my thanks. I wish to say thanks to the migrants because they are present in my city. They let us understand and discover that the presence of the migrants in my city is convenient, yes, economically convenient. The second, of course, thanks, is because they just remember us that we belong to one race. One race. I recognize only one race, the human race. We make difference between races, prepares the current Auschwitz, prepares violence and intolerance. And I think that today is the day of memory, just remembering the Nazi-fascist genocide. And I think that we have to take care because I am afraid that will be a second process of Nuremberg, a second process of Nuremberg. The first was against Italian and German. The first was against Nazi-fascist genocide. I think that one day, I don't know if in front of the Justice Court or in the pages of book of history, we will be processed for so many persons just dying in Mediterranean Sea without any help. And I think that I have to say thanks because they remember us, that our identity does not come from the blood of the parents. I am Palermitan, not because my father and my mother were Palermitan. I am Palermitan because I decided to be Palermitan. And I think that the migrants are just a cocktail. May I be a migrant? May I consider me a cocktail too, a cocktail of different sensibilities, of different cultures. In the city of Palermo, we have no deputy mayor for culture. We have no deputy mayor for culture. We have deputy mayor for cultures. Because I think that we have a lot of sensibility, cultural sensibility. And I am a combination. To be different, to be equal. I have not the identity of my father. I have not the identity of my brother, because identity is just an act of freedom. And I think that a Bengalis coming to live in Palermo, or a Palermo that going to live in Côte d'Ivoire, they just transform their identity and they enrich themselves. So we have only one human race, in my edition, in my opinion, and we have 7 billion of identities. Each human being has a different identity. So when somebody asks to me, how many migrants are in Palermo? I do not reply 80,000, 90,000, 100,000. I reply no one who lives in Palermo is Palermitan. I make no distinction between who was born in Palermo, who does live in Palermo. Therefore, we have approved, I propose that we approved just the Charter of Palermo. In the Charter of Palermo, we say that human international mobility is a human right. And our proposal is to abolish the residence permit. In my opinion, residence permit is the new slavery, the new death penalty. I know it was a long way to be free from the death penalty. It is still a long way to be free from death penalty. I know it is still a long way to be free from slavery, but I think that residence permit is the new slavery, the new death penalty. And I think that when I think to the migrants, I think that we need just to be free from the fear. Freedom from fear. Freedom from fear. It was one of the 4 freedoms of the famous Franklin Delano Roosevelt speech on 6th January 1941, when he spoke about freedom from fear. Freedom from fear. There's only one way to be free from fear, to take care. In the morning, when I wake up, when I stand up, I have fear of myself. But if I care, I take care of myself, I will be free from the fear. I think that we do something as a European states, European Union. In 19 May, I just sent a proposal to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to the the former president of the European Parliament, David Sassoli, a great friend of mine, And I said the European Union has to respect the right to live. And I proposed the REX, Rescue European Civil Service, just to let the people on the sea not to be obliged to die, just not making distinction between a sailman, a fisherman, and a migrant. I think that everybody is a human being, and we organized a network of cities. One is called the Global Parliament of Mayors. The main office of this Global Parliament of Mayors is in Den Haag, in Holland. And we are 100 mayors from all over the world that we think that we have to send a message to the states. We cannot accept that the border are used just for war, or the border are used to just destroy the human rights. And we organized in Palermo, just in the last June, an international meeting of mayors. The title was From Sea to City. I organized together with the mayor of Poznan and many mayors, the mayor of Paris, the mayor of Marseille, the mayor of Athens, the mayor of Tirana, the lady mayor of Tunisia, the mayor, of course, of Poznan and of Montpellier. We just send the message, we are ready to welcome. We have not fear for the migrants. I know that it's not so easy just to change the mind, but I think that our role, the role of the mayors, is just to let the people build the future. But I wish to tell you, I am not a jurist, I'm not a philosopher, or better, I am a jurist and a doctor honoris causa in German philosophy, but I am a politician. With these ideas, I am elected and re-elected. I think that we have just to think that probably is possible, just to change the mind of the people, to change our mind, thank the migrants, attending the sufferances of people infected by COVID.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to discuss a bit, but I think we can also open to the broader audience. If you have any questions, just raise your hands. I'm just going to kick off the conversation. But I was really touched by what Leoluca has said about migrants. I mean, it's quite remarkable in the chorus of negative comments towards migrants. I mean, if you pronounce the word migrants, it almost has already a negative connotation, even though, yeah. So how do we change the perception towards migrants and migration? It seems that it's a minority view. I mean, if I look at, the European Union, Leoluca, you know the European Union, the way it's handled the migration crisis was very poor, pathetic in a way. Didn't really handle it. The big migration crisis of 2015. I mean, apart from the gesture from Angela Merkel, who, opened her border. What do you think? How do we change the perception? How do we change the conversation, about migration?
I think it's definitely a difficult question, but it has to do with the way we look at the other. That means who is different from me, and who do I want to live with? Who do I accept in the borders of my country, inside the borders of my country? As the problem is that as we are experiencing an economic recession, things are going to get harder and harder. All sorts of ideas have come up, like migration points. The point. You are welcome into my country if you have a certain level of education.
Skills. If you're
skill.
Like quotas, migration quotas according to
exactly. And you see, somebody, it's fine for the receiving country to say, we don't want, you know, the people who can't do anything for us. We just want the best of the outside. But is there not something morally very wrong about this? I mean, you know, I've heard of amazing things like in Kenya, some agreement between the Kenyan government and the British government on nurses, you know, bringing nurses to help the NHS. But yes, of course we need more nurses for the NHS. But what about these nurses that are left their country and are now not doing the job that they should be doing in their own countries? So of course you're going to say, yes, but they want a better pay, yes, the conditions are better, but there's something fundamentally wrong about it. And I think that the idea that you can only open your borders to the people you want to, it's like a party. You know, I will have a list of guests, and I'll choose the best guests, and you can come in. It's not the way life is, and plus the pandemic has taught us that our preconceptions can be very, very, very misleading. People that we used to not even give a look at are people who might be saving us, who might be taking care of us. And I think that we need to look at things differently. And I think that what the migrants can bring to many countries has to be recognized. And you know, we need to organize ourselves.
And Elena, how is it difficult, you know, your line of work, you're passionate about, you know, migration and migrants' rights and the benefit of migration. How difficult is this to get this message across?
Thank you. We've heard from Leoluca, it is possible. We need political will, and we need a shift in political and media representations and rhetoric. In fact, we find that there is quite a strong sense of response, certainly initially in migration and displacement situations, where people are typically hospitable. You welcome the stranger, you provide assistance. And in my research in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, we've been working with members of so-called host communities, which have been places where neighborhoods where people from Syria have been seeking refuge. And in many instances, many instances, these have been encounters of support, in addition, of course, to xenophobia. But as a whole, there is support. Tensions are not inevitable. They are politically produced. They are structurally produced. There is the scapegoating of migrants. There is the exaggeration and the exceptionalization and the accentuation of certain lines of representation. But we have a continuation. We have a continuation of the proportion of people who migrate internationally. We have a very small number of people actually reaching the UK, for example, in comparison with any other countries in Europe. But we have the political rhetoric, which tells lies effectively. So what we need is a shift in the political rhetoric. We need a more transparent mode of media representation and the possibility of holding these falsehoods to account. This is scapegoating, which is helpful for political purposes, but equally politics, as we've heard, politicians, not just at the mayoral level, but all the way through, is possible. We just need a shift, and we need to not instrumentalize people, but recognize that the small number of people who leave their countries of origin, most people who are displaced remain within their countries of origin. A small proportion of those people cross into neighboring countries, and then a very, very small proportion of those people reach the countries of the so-called global north. It's possible to shift that rhetoric. It's possible to educate in schools about media consumption, about interrogating the media, interrogating political discourse, in addition to ensuring that there is the support for hospitable acts and for forms of mutual aid and solidarity that are there. We know that they are there. We know that neighbors are neighborly. We know that people are supportive of others. They are not necessarily the minority, but the media representation tells us that there is tension. It tells us that there is hatred, but actually there isn't always that tension, and it's often politically produced. So I think that emphasizing the structural inequalities, the political production of precarities and of inequalities is one of the key ways forward to rebuild better. Thank you.
Leoluca, maybe, is there any questions? Yes, we have questions. Let's take questions because we're already a bit late. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you introduce yourself? And
yeah. Hello, I'm Philip Völk. Thank you all for the contributions. I wanted to follow up on the last point on also on the narrative, because I've heard a lot and also tonight this narrative about being part of, especially with COVID, being part of a global community and sort of not knowing borders, and the virus has no borders and so on. And at the same time, the discourse also tonight a bit is a lot focused on the individual or on relatively small communities, like, for instance, the testimony of Palermo. And then where the action or the rules and the decisions are taken are not in those communities, and even your example with the European Union, then those decisions, both the positive example with Angela Merkel, or if we look at Hungary or other cases, are taken at the state level. So my question a bit is, as communication and information is more global and more unified maybe, how does this call into question statehood, and sort of that is the level where everything is taking place, right? And the divisive action is taking place.
Leoluca, do you want to answer that? The question of governance.
Yes, I just wish to say something. Let me say that I think that the mayors, I think that politicians, they play an educational role. We play an educational role, different level, of course, but we play an educational role. And I remember 3 really dangerous politicians who thought that it was possible to live without border. The 3 dangerous politicians were Schuman, Adenauer, and de Gasperi, who imagined it possible to abolish the border between France and Germany, between Italy and France, between Spain and France. They were crazy or they were wise. They played an educational role for the future of the people. And I think that what we need is this politician, of course, risking not to be elected, risking. They have just a vision. And the second point is that the vision is very simple. I am different from you. You are different from me. We are all different. We need to be all equal. And the diversity cannot be just the poorness, it's a richness. And therefore, I am proud to be the mayor of Palermo. We organize every year the largest gay pride in South Europe. And there was the first mayor just wedding to homosexual in Italy, because it is human right. And believe me, I was elected and re-elected without problems. It means that probably the politicians, the mayors, in many cases, they fear to have courage. And I think that when they have fear to have courage, they do not play the educational role. And finally, I wish just to say something else. I wish just to say that, may I speak about Palermo? When I started my experience, not exactly last year, it was 1985. I was elected the first time mayor of Palermo. Of course, I was 3 years old. By the way, when I was elected the first time mayor of Palermo. But when I started, the city of Palermo was governed by the mafia. And our fight was against the criminals, just to let the city be free from the government of the mafia. Of course, we have still mafia in Palermo, not only in New York. We have still mafia in Palermo, not only in Paris. We have still mafia in Palermo, not only in Berlin. But mafia does not govern any longer the city of Palermo. You understand what a terrible change. And our president of the republic, Sergio Mattarella, is the brother of politicians killed by the mafia, by the politicians. And I'm proud because I was the legal advisor of the brother of the president Mattarella. It means it was a long way just to be free from the government of mafia, and we needed just to use the law. It was the time of the culture of lawfulness, but the culture of lawfulness now is behind us, because we discovered not longer the culture of law, the culture of lawfulness, we discovered the culture of the rights. In many cases, the state law are against the human rights. And then to decide if I stay on the side of the state law, on the side of human rights, I stay on the side of human rights. Of course, I had many problems with the former Minister of Interior, Salvini. He told that he had to send the army to stop me in Palermo, because I recognize the residents, the residents, anagraphic residents, to all the people. Everybody in Palermo is not invisible. Receives from the mayor the anagraphic residence, and give to everybody anagraphic resident means to let everybody to be visible, because if somebody is invisible, it's dangerous for him and for the others. But if you are visible, there was a guy, so-called migrant, it's so bad the word migrant. Anyway, I am against the word migrants, somebody's against the migrants. It's really a difference. But I think that is really a bad word. But this migrant said to the newspaper, La Repubblica, said, I say thanks to the mayor, because Mr. Orlando gave to me the anagraphic residence. I don't know him, but I say thanks to him, because now finally, having the anagraphic residence, I can pay taxes. I can pay taxes. And they say, and you can rent an apartment not in black, and you can have a job not in black. And I can send the police to your address because you are no longer invisible. In democracy, the security cannot be alternative to the human rights. This is the lesson coming from the city, who was governed by the killer, was governed by the criminals, was governed by the mafia.
Thank you. Any other questions, please, from the audience? Yes, one more question.
I've not really thought this question through very well, but I'll try my best. As far as I understand it, throughout history, when times are tough, particularly for working people, it's very easy to turn against the other. And recently, in this, I can speak about Britain because I'm British and I'm most familiar with Britain. But in this country, it's very clear that, there's a clear relationship between the rise of precarity, the rise of 0-hour contracts. We live in a very diverse community in London. I'm from Manchester. In the north, you've got spaces, you've got cities and towns where there really aren't many people of color, especially in the countryside. And particularly in the north, people, is generally more working class. And people basically are often struggling. Now, when you see on TV someone say, you should care about migrants, you should care about the rights of non-white people, how do you convince people who might think, hey, but look at me over here, I'm struggling, why should I care so much? And then it's very easy for politicians and media to manipulate that frustration. And I think that's what we're seeing today. So how do you get out of that cycle?
Maybe Elena, you want to answer that question? It's again, the discourse.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, it's such an important question. And it's precisely because, for example, if we think about the asylum dispersal systems that the government has used in the UK, it's purposefully been sending asylum seekers who are required to go to the places that they have been dispersed to, have been sent to. The government has purposefully been sending asylum seekers to the poorest areas, to the areas where infrastructure is weakest. And this is one of the reasons why there is politically produced tension. So the tensions are not inevitable. The scapegoating is not inevitable. It is politically produced. And knowing that it's politically produced means that it is possible to identify different ways of engaging with and communicating with different members of communities. There definitely is tension, but again, kind of tying back to the earlier question, we have multiple scales of engagement. We have neighbours who are friendly to neighbours. We have local faith communities which are supportive. We have local shops that provide assistance. These acts take place, but they are not sustainable because of the scale of action. And what we need is that bigger attention to the structural inequalities that produce precarities. I don't have the clear, easy answer to how to do that, but I would say that we need to look for and magnify those experiences of mutual aid and solidarity. We need to recognize that this is one of many discourses. There is the discourse of rejection and of turning against and scapegoating migrants and racialized minorities or minoritized migrants, but it's not inevitable. There are other ways of being and other ways of being with one another. They already exist. They can be scaled up, and starting small and identifying where those are is a really important step to recognize that this other world already exists. This other way of being is there. And we need to, I think, draw attention to those structures and the political production of those tensions. And being attentive to that can help shift the way that we engage with one another.
Véronique, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. I just want to say that, yes, it is possible to change the narrative. And I totally agree that what is happening sometimes is really heartwarming, but it's not highlighted. So most of the time, unfortunately, it's the tensions and the conflicts between communities that make the news. And therefore, there is this perception that things are completely going out of control. And I think that, yes, this narrative could be changed. And I think also maybe the worst that could happen, and it was mentioned earlier, is apathy. That means not saying, okay, it's too much for me, it's beyond anything that I can do. And try to get involved wherever it's possible to get involved. Probably it means, like, for example, you've mentioned the EU, which is a big institution. So you have to elect. I mean, these are people who have been elected who are running this institution. So as a citizen, I think you also have a part to do. But I think that everybody in their own capacity can do something. And I think that if we can believe in the possibility of change, then we're in a better place.
Thank you, Véronique, for this call to arms and to get out of the apathy. It's true that the pandemic kind of, all plunged us into some sort of lethargy. So on this note, thank you so much to my panelists for your time. Thank you to the audience for questions. And I'm going to call Jason again for the transition. Thank you.
Anne-Sylvaine Chassany, our chair, Véronique Tadjo, Elena there in Oxford, and always good to know the mayor of Palermo. You never know when that could come in handy. Grazie.
How exciting and safe.
I had my honeymoon, my luna de miele in Palermo, but you weren't there then, so I didn't get the best hotel. But
next time, call
next
me,
time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to our panel. Fantastic discussion. If you want to follow up more on what they were talking about, I think that the question from the gentleman in the audience was fantastic. There's a film called Hostile at the moment, which is about the UK's hostile environment for migrants and how we treat, which Elena was sort of referring to. It's a thoroughly engaging documentary which is touring in UK cinemas at the moment. Little plug for that. I've got no investment in it. I just thought you might like to know. ladies and gentlemen, we will be having a short break before our next panel, the state in all its states. But you're very welcome to stay for that. Even if you haven't booked for it, you're very welcome to stay where you are. And the next panel will be amazing. Alan Rusbridger is part of that. So you're welcome to stay. And in the meantime, you can hear some of the children from the lycée over the road talking about some of the ideas. We've had some in French, some in English. It's very cute. And you can listen to that. And we'll be back in about 8 minutes. See you then.